Hello, and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. Today on the podcast, we're gonna kind of pick things up where we left off last week, where we talked about the death of average. And I think the theme that kind of came out of that was, authenticity and primarily identity. So now that we're looking at, what does that death of average actually mean? What is, and how do you define identity and kind of push that towards the top? I want to kind of address and kind of talk through some tactical ways to tackle that, and also to get your mind thinking about how it is exactly you can do that and or apply that to your business, your brand, maybe even your personal brand. So let's get into this. So as we've talked about authenticity being one of the key, differentiation points, it's something that's a little elusive because it's kind of cliche, and most people are like, well, what does that even mean? So how do you actually build that in, especially if you don't know how to identify it, or if maybe you don't even have it yet? So we talked about knowing who you are is one of the main key points of this, and really leaning into what separates you and what makes you different than your competition or the people, you're trying to stand out from amongst the crowd. But building that, I mean, what is that process? So a lot of people have a feeling about what it is they believe, but they're not actually saying it out loud. I think we all have opinions and beliefs and kind of, thoughts as to why we do what we do, how we do it, and even thoughts about why you started your business versus somebody else. But if you're not telling anybody about those things, how is anybody supposed to know? So the difference is there, cultivate those things. Bring those things to the surface, make that list, talk about what those things are. And then once you've identified those items, how do we throw a little gas on those items to get fire going, to get talking about some of those things that actually do make you different? The other thing is, and we all have this in business, we all have experience and we all have gut feelings, right? You need to lean into those gut feelings. Those are your instincts. Those are your intuition. And that is your experience talking to you. You also need to bring that into this conversation about authenticity. Bring that into your brand and bring those gut feelings or that edginess to the surface so that people kind of understand that you're running with a belief system that aligns with the actions that you're taking on the backside. So how many businesses are sitting, on a point of view that they don't actually have, which I kind of already addressed? I would say a ton. Now, I've seen people overcorrect it. Maybe they get into politics, or maybe they pick battles online that they just don't need to be a part of. But at the end of the day, they're out there, they're mixing it up. They're putting their thoughts, their beliefs, their core values out there for people to see. And that's the good part. Now, what I'm saying is identify those things, pare that list down, figure out which attributes or core values you want to lead with that build up, roll up into your authenticity, and lean into them, showcase them, talk about them. Make sure you're putting it out there as to why you're different so people can understand that it's more about choosing you. It's more about choosing almost an alignment versus a set of services that everybody can provide. And how do you get there, right? I know a lot of people are probably thinking easier said than done, but I don't even know how to start. So my advice to you is keep it simple. You're not trying to invent a methodology or a belief system that isn't there. You're basically trying to extract pieces of information that are there. So just broad strokes, you're not trying to build something from scratch. You're simply trying to look in the mirror and be honest with yourself. Think about those pieces that make you different and why they might be important to a potential client, potential customer, or even to potentially include within your creative work or the solutions that you provide to your customers. And the last thing I'll say on this topic is this is not your mission statement or your corporate tagline. So don't relegate it or simplify it down to a mission statement, a corporate tagline, or a set of core values. These are things that you want to be inherently unique and different about you so that you can then leverage them in the sales process and in the delivery and service and quality process of the different, whatever it is you're trying to do from a business perspective. So if you're picking up what I'm laying down and you understand kind of where this is going, you feel like, okay, I'm on board, I'm convinced, let's do this. You're probably moving towards the next step, which is sitting down in front of a blank page or a blank canvas and then thinking, okay, great. Now what? So how I would start, and again, you can expand, contract, however you got to do this to get to your authenticity or to your wire to get to those details. But what I would suggest is sitting down and starting with 3 questions. Ask yourself 3 simple questions. And then first is, what frustrates you about the industry that nobody's saying out loud? So look at your competition, look at the feedback you get from your clients. You're probably armed with this information on a daily basis. What are those things? And limit it, 3, 4, 5, keep it digestible. But what are those things that frustrate you and or your customers or your audience about your industry that nobody talks about? Maybe it's even something that's just kind of assumed or expected because that's the way it's always been. So again, what are those 3 to 5 things? Secondly, what do you believe should be true that isn't right now? So think about any service industry, any industry where you're actually providing a product or a deliverable. There's a lot of guarantees. There's a lot of, I would say peacocking going on about levels of quality and all those kinds of things. So being in the industry and being knowledgeable about what it is you do and what services you provide, again, what do you believe should be true? What aspects are true versus not true? And start to think about, which pieces of that can I latch onto and or leverage in connection with my beliefs? And lastly, who is this perspective actually for? I personally think it starts with you. I think the perspective at the beginning is about you aligning those things and that authenticity so that you can stand behind it and easily speak to it. You can easily stand up for it. You can easily just align your day-to-day actions with it because it's natural for you. But I also then think, secondly, you need to look at that perspective of the customer and as to whether or not this is attractive. Is this what they want? One of the things that I hear often with my own brand is my clients, the people I interact with, the prospects I work with, most love the transparency. They love to be able to have a partner that just kind of talks them through the process, even if it's not perfect or even if it's not what they want to hear. Now I have other prospects or not clients that sometimes the people just want to be told what they want to hear, but that's not the kind of company we are. So think about, not only who you are and align those pieces, but who do you want to be for that end user or that customer? So if you've gotten this far, you figured, you sat down, you figured out what you believe. Now the challenge is to try to make it sound professional and digestible for the end user so that they understand what you're talking about. So the big thing is, how do you actually say it without sounding salesy, without sounding like a corporate mission statement, which I said you want to stay away from. And to be honest, this is where people mess up. They take a raw, honest belief and they polish it to the point where it does sound corporate, it sounds manufactured, or it even sounds, inauthentic to what their day-to-day actions actually will look like versus what they say they do or don't believe. So you could probably name, like me, you could probably name a lot of businesses that are like, well, that's, that doesn't align with what they put out there as far as their brand message and stuff like that. And that's right there is what you want to avoid. So how do you do that? Simply don't over-explain it and don't justify it. Keep it simple. Don't try to polish it to the point where it doesn't make sense or it's hard to understand. Trying to say it, out loud to someone and having to try to convince them of your beliefs or having to try to convince them of, hey, I want you to buy into this. If they don't buy into it naturally, it probably wasn't meant to be, and that's okay. So you have to keep it simple, keep it natural, and just keep it in your own words so that people can understand it and they can digest the true meaning behind it. What's great about that is if you can figure that piece out, it won't take long and you will get people validating this for you on a daily basis. When they hear what your brand is about. They see your messaging going out there that displays this level of transparency. Somewhere along the line, you're either going to get it just in a passing comment, or you're going to get it in some form of customer review or a client review where they basically say, yeah, that's so true about you, or I got exactly what I expected because the guy in the video or the guy in the sales process was the same guy who delivered on X, Y, and Z results. So put it out there in that way and just let the clients validate it for you. So if you're at this point where you've actually defined it and you kind of have a shape of kind of how this is coming together, the next step is, what do I do with it? How do I make it so that it trickles down to my team? So the challenge here is that you've made some real decisions and you've defined some, true but vulnerable aspects of your culture and your belief system that you now have to put shape to. This point of view is not only going to trickle into potentially how do you market or position your brand or your business, but it's going to trickle its way into how you talk about your business, to the audience, to the customer, to whatever. So you need to remember that it needs to feel natural. It needs to feel inherent, and it needs to not kind of turn into an empty promise or a slogan, so to speak. So if you believe it, it's got to show up everywhere. And the trick there is that it has to trickle down into the people that you lead, the people within your team. So the question is, how do you embed it? How do you teach it to the team? How do you get it out there to the point where they buy into this idea and they understand that this is the differentiator? So it starts with you. First of all, you have to live it. You have to adhere to it. You have to follow the rules that you set forth, and you now have to educate. You have to go to your team. You have to talk about it. You have to explain pieces of it, allow them to shoot holes in it, allow them to ask questions, and start to really move the pieces around to align the systems and the processes and the how you deliver the end result with everything you're talking about. And so that it's all ingredients in one big soup to some degree, but you have to kind of attack each one of these things separately. So like I said, it starts with you. You got to bring it to your team. It trickles into the different projects and clients that you either take on and or pass on, because there needs to be an alignment there. They need to understand who you are and appreciate that. If someone on your team is not aligned, that's another conversation that needs to happen as to whether or not they can get there. So you need to start looking at clients, team members, and the people you associate your brand and your business with as to whether or not they align with this direction and this new defined approach that you're moving towards. So all in is what we're talking about client experience. And one of the things I talk about with my own brand is we call it CX, but it's either the Cyberdogz experience, which is internal and external, or it's just the client experience, which is just the process of delivery and how we hopefully meet expectations every time for our clients. So you need to define that for your brand. What is that experience? What does that journey look like? How are you keeping it simple, and how are you using different points in that journey to leverage your own uniqueness or your own beliefs from a brand and a marketing perspective? And then lastly is, once you've kind of rode this train for a while and you've got the examples, perhaps you've got the team drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and you've got some traction with this whole thing, it's now to start, pulling and extracting examples of work. How can you then take the last 90 days, last 6 months, whatever it is, and pull out some case studies and some white papers so that the next 90 days or the next 6 months, you can start to validate whether or not this approach is working, but you can also use it as a sales tool as you go out there and educate more people about what it is, that you're doing and why you're doing it. So at this point, you're probably thinking, easy for the marketing guy to say, this process does get a little woo, it does get a little fluffy. So I get it. It's a process and it's not something that can be easily done. However, we've seen a lot of people try this. We've seen a lot of people, I don't want to say screw this up, but have come out of the end of this with less than desirable results. And it's because they kind of got in their own way. I want to touch on a couple patterns of failure that we've seen and even things that we walked through in helping other clients do this. I will kind of throw in there as well. Like, we work with a lot of clients on trying to figure this out for themselves because it is hard to do for yourself. It's hard to look in the mirror and kind of extract those pieces of yourself. So just know that, I'm sure there's other companies, but Cyberdogz is here to help you with that if you still need it. But here's some of the things that you can look out for in, kind of exploring this process for yourself. The first one, and you'll hear me talk about this in different episodes where you'll talk about the monkey see, monkey do approach, which a lot of people do. They go into an industry or they align themselves with, I kind of want to be like this brand, and they end up copying what somebody else is doing instead of finding their own angle. And I would, this is a made up percentage, but I would say that's 90% of the time. I know it's high anyway, because everybody kind of goes into their industry trying to compete and or look like the guy next to them, which, again, I've said this many times, that's where the white noise is. So if you're engineering your approach to blend in and or try to align yourself with everybody else, you're actually steering into the white noise where you can't stand out. So long story short is find your own path, find your own angle, and really focus on those pieces that make you different. And secondly, I mentioned this earlier, but when you go through this process and you're trying to find, hey, what are those 3, 4, 5 things that make me different and how do I leverage those? Keep it to the 3 or 4, maybe 5 things total. Don't go too broad. A lot of people go so broad that they kind of lose their niche. They kind of lose their focus and they kind of forget what are those 1 or 2 things that make them truly unique. So trying to be, all things to all people, it doesn't work, and it actually waters down this whole approach. So try to keep it very tight and very unique to the things you can succeed with. The third thing is, I think when you launch this, you have to have the pieces in place to back it up. So announcing a brand shift or putting a brand message out there or aligning a brand, like, obviously I'm all for it, but at the same time, you have to be ready to back it up, because if there's a disconnect there or it's disjointed, somewhere along the line, whether it's super obvious or just subliminal, people are going to notice. And that disconnect, it hurts you. It hurts you over time and it hurts you by volume. So if you're going to do it, just make sure everything is ready to go. And even if you can't do everything day one, you got to be working towards the day where, that we've got all the pieces in place and we're feeling confident about it. I would say, with that, build a plan, but build it in a way that you can follow it and or stick to it. Shifting things consistently or trying to kind of build the bike as you ride it is a tricky way to do this, because it's not authentic. It's more, it's more made up along the way, which people can read into. Where I think if you set course, if you kind of develop what that plan looks like, that's momentum. It's going to be building kind of upon itself to get you to that crescendo, so to speak, as to where you want to go. So just make sure that you have that plan and you don't make it up as you go once you start the process. The other thing is giving it time. I think the most important thing with this is business is hard, right? So we're all trying to move fast. We're all trying to get things done. We're all trying to get results. We're trying to almost kind of force the issue and trying to, we'd all like to get there sooner or later, and we'd all like to get there faster than the next guy. I'm not saying that can't happen from time to time, but don't focus on that. Be able to give it time. And like I said, if you map out those phases, it could be a 30, 60, 90-day plan to get to a certain point in the process. Just expect those results to track that way. Give yourself time for not only for these new focuses and different things to kind of settle in, but give the client time to absorb it, because it takes them time. When you do a brand shift like this or a brand calibration, obviously it's going to be top of mind for you because you're living through it in real time. the client's catching it on the backside as you're feeding it to them. So you got to give them time to digest it and give them time to catch up with it as well. And then the last thing, the point of view, this new direction, putting yourself out there in this way without consistency is just confusing. It's noise. It's just more of a mess to the audience and for those who are trying to understand you. So consistency and having it dialed in and having it, and when I say consistency, I mean cadence, I mean how you're posting it, and I also mean the messaging being consistent and authentic and dialed into one another. So your message is clear, the understanding of who you are, what you do, why you do it, and what's unique about you is obvious in all the messaging and the collective, kind of messaging plan you put forth. So we've touched on what we've seen fail and maybe some of the pitfalls that you can potentially fall into in kind of working through this process. So let's talk about, maybe a real life example and then an example of what this journey looks like, maybe when done in alignment with what I'm saying here. So one thing we do at Cyberdogz, and I talk about this a lot with my clients, but I never ask the clients to do anything that I haven't done myself. I've never pitched a service or pitched a partner or pitched a third-party solution that I haven't pitched myself. And just like this topic, I'm not asking you to do anything that I haven't done myself. So let's talk about how we've taken the Cyberdogz brand, and just so we're clear, we're not even done with the process yet. So this is what it looked like for us, and this is what it looked like, basically the same guidance and the same direction that I'm providing you. This is a process that we not only started probably, call it 6 months or so ago, but we're still going through it. So for us, we got to that 10-ish year mark, and along the way, we had different people involved. We had, we pivoted depending on what clients we were working with. Maybe it was a niche we were chasing. Maybe, this happens a lot, even with websites and social media, is that you keep adding things on over time. And before you know it, you have like this Frankenstein effect of like, it's still, it's not completely out of whack, but at the same time, it's not as dialed in and or tight as it possibly could be because we've added all these different layers. So at the end of 2025, that was one of, and I'd been thinking about it even before then, but at the end of 2025, that was one of my big things is like, I'm not saying it's bad the way it is, but I don't feel like it's aligned to where we need to be or where we're headed. So we needed to kind of do a cleanse of sorts. And in our case, we needed to do a cleanse of sorts of, from year 0 to 9, so to speak. How did we get so far off track, or what things did we adopt in that process that were either out of alignment with who we are as a brand or out of alignment with where it is we want to go? So we had to kind of do an audit of things to figure out what we were keeping and what we were getting rid of. And when we did that, it was the visual piece, it was the structural piece, it was the service, that piece. And for me specifically, which matters the most, it was the messaging piece. It was all the different things where maybe we'd become kind of cookie cutter in a way because, maybe we had different people involved or we were trying to accomplish a certain task and we never rewound that process when it didn't work or we changed direction again. We just let it continue to go. So we looked at the visual, the voice, the aesthetics of the tactical side of things, from the website to social media and any collateral that we were putting out there. So we did a full audit. And then once we did that audit, we kind of had our top suspects lined up as to, okay, these are the areas of concern. These are the areas that we want to really attack. How do these either align or not align with what we're trying to do? What's the angle? So we had to kind of then look at those items through a critical lens and decide what we're keeping, what we're not keeping. And at the same time, have we developed some gaps? So now that we've taken everything that we're doing, we're cutting it up and we're moving and replacing. Yeah, sure enough, there were gaps. So now we have other things that we have to address as this calibration process continues. And I think what we had to do to get there is we had to ask ourselves a lot of questions about not only who we are, where we've come in the last decade, who is the team in place now, and how do we, build it around their skill sets, their beliefs, but how do we do it in a way that's attractive and aligns with potential projects, clients, and the future of our own brand. So again, looking in the mirror, asking a lot of those questions and really breaking it down, from that point. So the other thing, and I would say where this is kind of building towards, is this created a major, I don't want to say shift, but an alignment with who we are now versus who we are when we started and where we want to go. So one of the big gaps we identified in this whole process is we had ignored ourselves for a long time. Somewhere, making this up, but somewhere around the 5 or 6 year mark, we settled in, we let the dust settle, and we just focused on the clients. So for another 2 to 3 years, we were not evolving. We were doing the work and, going through the motions, but we were not evolving the brand and aligning it. So why I say that is because we had 3 years worth of home runs, cool projects, fun stories, like things we should have been, they were actually our differentiators. We had things that we should have been promoting, putting out in the world and throwing gas on to attract new clients and to kind of reestablish and realign ourselves with who we were at the time, but also who we were becoming in this process. And we just completely neglected it. So we had to then take that body of work and it's like, okay, now how do we bring that back to the surface? How do we put that back in play so that as we build this next, version of ourselves for the next 10 years, we've got a really solid foundation, but a jumping off point that's accurate as to who we are. So what that really kind of did for us is, and it was surprising because you kind of forget. It was surprising in that you kind of forget about some of those projects, but you kind of forget how fast time goes. And all of a sudden it's like, man, we haven't touched the website since this date, or we haven't updated this service since this. And that was really the surprising piece, is because, maybe there's a part of it for me as the business owner where I thought other people were taking care of it. And maybe they thought, if Mike didn't give me the direction, maybe it just stays the way it is. So there was a lot of surprises there that kind of came up as to not only the things we had to address, but how we need to create processes around how to maintain them going forward. Which, again, when I talked about leaning into this idea of, differentiation and what makes you special and all these things, you got to have the processes in place to support it all the way through your business. So again, learning the hard way, that was one of the things that kind of became obvious to us as we continued to kind of peel back these layers of, the onion, so to speak, as to our own brand calibration. So what I want to really stress in this process is that that's kind of how we got there up to this point. Like I said, we probably started this for ourselves about 6 months ago, which means, we got a lot of pieces in place and I think we're moving in the right direction, but we've probably got 1 or 2 phases left to accomplish. And the message there is you got to build a plan, but you also have to understand this is not a one-time event. This is something that's going to continue to evolve and change and hopefully kind of level up as we go along. So learning from my mistakes of, hey, we backburnered everything and took our eye off the ball for a while. Now that we've done all this calibration and we've gotten to the point where it's a focus, now we have to keep it a focus. We have to keep our eye on this thing and make sure that we're not letting this happen again, because it's costly from a business perspective and it's costly from a time perspective. So when I think about the gap of, where we were versus where we should be, how many clients did we miss out on in that process for not positioning ourselves the right way? How many prospects, so to speak, and even looked us up, just thought, I don't know if that's the kind of company I want to work for, because we left all the good stuff, kind of off the table because we just never got to it. like I said, we had a whole pile of home runs that we hadn't even shared with anybody. So shame on us, but those are the kinds of things that I think about now is I don't want to relive that process. And I certainly don't want to make the same mistake twice. So at this point in the process, I've explained this process, kind of how we approached it, the experience that we went through personally, having gone through it for ourselves. I think I've covered all of the major points and the major steps in the process. So if you're sitting there thinking, okay, either A, I have more questions, or okay, I'm sold, bottom line is, what do I do next? And for me, that's simple. You need to sit down and you need to start walking through these questions. What frustrates you? What is true about us? What is our differentiator? Like how do we actually stand out from the competition? And just start doing the work, start mapping it out. And, if you're not somebody who can kind of do that just on a solo basis, find somebody in your organization that can sit down and talk through it with you and that'll be honest with you, and start to work through what that looks like and how then you can make that list so you can start working towards applying it to your business. And the second thing, review it. Sit down with the people you trust, sit down with your team, sit down with the leaders within your organization and fill them in. This is the direction we're going. This is what I believe to be true. This is how we're positioning ourselves. This is where I think we're missing out. And I think there's leverage to be had in leaning into these areas of authenticity, and it actually then differentiates us from the competition. And then have that conversation with that team. Say it out loud, get it out there, have the conversation, and validate the direction you're about to take with all this. And then next step, you got to get aligned. Once your team understands and they're on board and they feel like, this is something they feel to be true and something that they can support, now you got to start working through the pieces. You got to start identifying the processes and the kind of the tactical steps in the process where, this is where we're going to kind of filter this information in and apply it to our business so that it then trickles down to the experience of the customer. At the end of the day, the businesses that are winning right now aren't the ones that are trying to be everything to everyone. You hear a lot of chatter and a lot of conversation out there about niche. And I do think niche is important as well, but I do think the niche that you want to focus on today is the one that's the closest to you, which is who you are as a brand and what you can then, offer to your clients that makes you special. Brands who are winning know exactly who they are, how they say it, and they actually stick with it even when it's hard, because it is hard to be different. You'll notice that, look at the banking industry. Very few banks look unique. They all look very similar. And I would say if you could have a conversation with the small amount of banks that actually differentiate themselves, I bet you they would tell you a story about how it was hard, how their message didn't cut through the same as everybody else's on day one. And that's okay. That's the whole point of this, is it's a long game, not a short game. So figure out what separates you and start on that today. And if you need any help with it, if you want to have a conversation, no strings attached, reach out to Cyberdogz and we'd be happy to walk you through the process.